Hi, this is Sequential Scott. A friend recently asked for a portrait of James T. Kirk, and so this is a progression of that painting. The context was that he is going to print this screenshot out at a size of about 2 by 3 feet and hang 6 different portraits based on it from different artists around it. Other than that, he gave me free rein in terms of style and how I wanted to approach the picture. For me, the most important thing about this is the expression. That is what I enjoy working on, and so I wanted to focus on that, on getting the likeness, and also on continuing with ink and watercolor pencils, which I've been working on recently. The keys to this expression are, like with any expression, the configuration of the proportions and like the distance between the eyes and the eyebrows, general shape. It's not any one thing, it's how everything fits together. Something else, though, that I thought would be interesting in this sheen of sweat also adds to the expression. And so it's important for that to be there and be a part of the painting. So the first stage is to go through and do the pencil sketch. And when I do a pencil sketch like this for watercolor pencil, I want to basically have a guide drawing. I'm not looking for the pencil to show through. The paint is pretty much going to cover it up. So at this stage, what I'm focusing on is not actual shading, but more individual shapes. So for example, this little area on Kirk's face from the reference drawing has shapes here. There's a little slightly darker area on his cheek that looks about like that. There's a slightly lighter area on the side of his neck where some light is hitting it. And so I'm not doing the shading, it's like I'm doing a contour map so that I can see where the light and dark is going to change. So after this step, I went ahead to the ink. Now the style that I chose was a combination of comic book and Art Nouveau. I really like Alphonse Mucha as an artist, one of my favorites, and so I focused on minimal line work with a heavy border around the outside, which is pretty typical of Art Nouveau, and then thinner minimal line work inside with occasional texture lines. The line work here is heaviest on this side because that's where I want the focus to be, and also because that is the outline of the object. Something else I want to point out here is at around this time in the drawing, I had the idea of introducing this theme of the split. So the reference photo down here has the background split into two, one with this lattice work and one with seeing more of the room back there. I liked that, and if you have seen this episode of Star Trek, you know that Kirk has been split into two by the transporter, and there's a passive, nice Kirk and an aggressive, mean one, and that's what we're seeing here. So I like the idea of having a split in the background, and I also like the idea of having the picture be split. So you see this area right there, I left that open so that I could make it seem like there was an actual split in the painting itself, and part of it was sliding or falling off to the side. So after doing this, it was time to go on and begin the watercolor pencil. So here's the first step of that. Underpainting. In this case, with Caucasian skin, I usually choose a purple or a blue and start putting that down where I want the shadows on the face to be. Later, when I go over this with reds and peaches and oranges or yellows, then the purple will kind of dial that back a little bit, make it more neutral, and make it recede a little more. But just the purple was not quite dark enough. If you push down with a watercolor pencil, you only make the color more intense. You don't necessarily get it darker. So after I went over with purple, I did another pass with black watercolor pencil. And the idea being that when you go over it with the water, they're going to mix and turn into a single shade. So doing that led to this. Now let me point out a couple of things here. Aside from the colors, we've got some little areas of white right up there. There's one that you can't see that's right here that will capture a reflection on Kirk's eyebrow. Also, this area right here, you can just barely make out some masking fluid that I put down, or frisket. That's what I used up here as well. It forms kind of a rubbery or plastic type seal over the paper, and later you can pull it back up and leave the original paper underneath. So this was my experiment on how to get the sort of the beads of sweat. Now over here, I wanted to leave the paper so that it looks like the painting is being split right there and starting to fall off to the side. In terms of the paint itself and the painting, it's really the light and dark values that determine whether something's going to look 3D and kind of look right. The color is less important for that. So the job of the underpainting is to get the form looking basically right. So after this, the next step then is to go over and start working on the actual, what we think of as the skin color. So, I've got some yellows and oranges. I was kind of looking through at the painting and trying to mimic what I saw there, and also put in the shades that typically are associated with Caucasian skin. So I kind of went over even the areas that I had put in shade before. They got covered over with the red and the peach and the yellow. I also started in on the collar down here, but I'm leaving the hair still. You can see that I've got some very basic tan, just very light down here, and I've already let it drip a little bit. I did that by putting down a lot of water and going over the paint that way, and then lifting the paper up to make it drip. And one of the ideas that you can just barely see right there, it'll come in stronger later, is that the drips are going diagonally as opposed to down to support this idea of a split in the page. So what does this look like when we go over it with the water? It goes like this. Now at this point, the colors have started to blend, and I'm getting the general look that I want. I'm still not sure if the light and dark is right yet. There's a dark area down at the bottom. There will be a dark area up here. If you look at the picture of Kirk himself in the reference, you got the dark hair and the dark collar, and the face itself is brighter than either of those. So that needs to be the case here as well. But before I do that hair, it's going to be hard to decide how light and dark to make the rest of the skin. I'll be adjusting that later. The next step was to go in and start working on the hair. I also started working in on the background some. Now, as far as the hair, following the basic idea of breaking down shapes, I took this dark area at the side of Kirk's head and make sure I had some good dark brown right there. That's brown and black together. Same with this area right there. There's a definite dark area in the reference at that point. Where the hair kind of flips over, it makes this curve. So really it's not thinking in terms of drawing hair, it's more thinking in terms of where are the areas of light and dark. You can also see I've started working in more of the shading down in the shirt area. And I've started to lay in some background. Now I had decided earlier not to focus on this lattice work back here. There's a lot of holes to draw and line up, and the painting didn't really call for that in terms of time frame and everything about it. So I knew I was going to leave this lighter because this side of Kirk over here is going to be generally dark. That's a dark to lighter transition. Whereas on this other side, we've got a light to dark transition, so I wanted to kind of keep that. I suggested a ceiling up there, but I don't want to get too detailed. And as we'll see in the next thing, we're getting close to being done here, I went ahead and laid in this panel that's in the background. Now, if you knows Trek, you know that's probably a replicator, but it's not real clear what it actually is. At this point, I have pulled up that frisket, the masking liquid, and it's left this sort of bolt kind of shape, this diagonal thing. And you can also see up in the forehead where it's left the white that I've pulled up and the highlights in the mouth. Additionally, as I put some shapes back here, I started feeling like the area over on the left just needed a little bit more. And I like the diagonal that this introduces on this area, so I decided to replicate that up here with a darker shape that's lightning bolt-like but jagged to go along with his expression. So I felt that it helped the composition there. And at this stage, let me go back to the hair for just a moment. I left certain light areas, but really I started going in with the browns and the darks and just kind of fiddling with it. Looking back and forth at the reference photo and the painting. In this area, you could see that I was using some texture some. I had the brush lined up so that it would give little horizontal dabs as I just kind of poked the paper. And that's generally the way his hair would be flowing, but I'm not focusing on each individual hair. So finally, here was the finished version, scanned in and adjusted a little bit. And I think in a process thing like this, it's always helpful to get critique as you're doing it, but also to do it for yourself. So here are a couple of things that I think worked well with the painting and that I think could be improved. I'll actually start with the improvement stuff first so we can end on a good note. A couple of things that at the end of it, the forehead area up here in particular, it did not blend as smoothly as I would have liked. I think I overworked the skin tone and texture here. And if I had not tried to use quite so many colors, I think that would have come out better. The thematic idea of the split. The theme, I think, is fine. The way this split happened and the way that the drips came out, I think it was an interesting and a decent idea. Perhaps I could have put some shading right along this border to make it look like paper was sitting on top of a surface or something like that. But really, I think what I needed to do was plan it in from the beginning more than I did. So I was really focused on the face and getting the expression and the technique of all that, and didn't really think through the background as clearly as I should have. So a couple of the good things, I mentioned that I was focused on the expression and the likeness, and I think that came out pretty well. I look at that and go, yep, that's James T. Kirk, and certainly get that expression. So I'm happy with how that came out. And normally, when you do a portrait and are trying to get someone's likeness, you're not going to have a reference photo sitting right next to it. So even if it doesn't line up exactly with the photo, which this doesn't, that's fine. If people recognize it, that's cool. In this case, though, that's actually going to be sitting right next to the painting, but oh well. So I'm reasonably happy with how the hair came out. In terms of trying this kind of texture where I was focusing just more on abstract shapes, not even thinking in terms of structures of shape inside the hair. It came out looking about the way I wanted it to. I like how the texture kind of just came out there. And finally, I find the highlights interesting. At first glance, I do see the basics of a sheen of sweat there. I could have gone in and tried to detail each bead of sweat, but I kind of think that way lay madness. And as you first look at this, I think it reads correctly. I do think it could have been a little more refined, and that really is just going to take more practice with using the masking fluid. So that's it for the progression. I hope you enjoyed it, and happy drawing.